so we don't need that. And thanks a lot, Chancellor of the University of Dar es Salaam, President Kikwete, Minister of Education and Science, Vice Chancellor, Chairperson of Council, friends and comrades. I think it was correct for one of our colleagues here to talk about the fact that we start a bit late. We were informed that because Her Excellency, President of Namibia, had come, and happily you were here to engage her, that we needed to come a little bit later. I think the delay was proper. I'm very, very glad indeed that you stayed so that we can have this short engagement. Our scene setter, Dr. Ndlozi, I was very glad when he said, I'm not here today to lecture. I've been looking for a job at the University of Dar es Salaam as a lecturer. I hope they give me a job. The idea was that we should meet here to engage one another on this topic that's on our board here, about re-energizing, reigniting the African Renaissance. Not for either President Kikwete or myself to lecture. I think that was said by my comrade there, Sabato, was correct. It was very, very correct indeed that we're not here to answer questions. We're here to engage one another in answering those questions. I'm very, very glad indeed that when he said, even the youth have got answers. So it was not for the youth to pose questions, but to say, this is where we are today, this is where we need to be tomorrow. It's the kind of engagement that we were supposed to have. So you'll excuse me if I don't answer the questions as they've been put. The word Renaissance, we know all of us what it means. It means a rebirth. So when we talk about an African Renaissance, we're talking about an Africa reborn. Dr. Ndlozi, I don't know whether we all know what that means. What is this Africa that we imagine? I think our colleague who talked about socio-economic development did say there are certain things that have gone wrong which should not happen, then we would know that we are being reborn. One of the great strengths, my view, one of the great strengths of the OAU and the AU, these continental organizations, is that they actually attended to this matter. An Africa reborn, what should it look like? As a consequence of which, as a continent, we are very, very rich in terms of policy. I don't know of any major issue facing us as Africans on which there is no continental policy. the politics of our continent, issues about democracy, accountability, good governance, all of that. They are policies. When we're talking about women's empowerment, gender equality, and all of that, they are policies. Issues of youth development, youth empowerment, and so on, culture, education, science and technology, peace and security, all of these things. If I asked, if we had time, I asked the universities here, the students of the University of Dar es Salaam, and say, do they know what AU, that's not AU, African Continental Policy on Youth Development is? Can you please raise your hands? None. Yet there is. And I think we would find that with regard to many of these policies, which I say exist, and when Dar es Salaam University appoints me lecturer, I will give you the documents. This is part of our challenge. The policy positions exist on the continent, approved by our political leaders, many of them ratified by our parliaments. So there's a policy framework which exists for the renaissance of Africa. One of our comrades just said that the answer is socialism. It's not, that one I know is not in the AU policies. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I know it's not in the policies. There is no shortage of a general, overall, comprehensive policy framework to define the kind of new Africa we want, the Africa reborn. There's a problem. The problem is that the Africans don't know of that. How do we solve it? I don't have an answer to that question. But it's a critical matter that we need to solve. If we say the future of our continent, as Dr. Ndlozi was saying, this issue of self-reliance, the future of our continent is defined by ourselves. He said it's not going to be defined by the Chinese or the Indians or the Americans or the Russians, but ourselves, correct. But I'm saying here is African institutions which say, with regard to that question, this is what our future should be politically, economically, peace and security, this and that and the other. And yet as Africans, we don't know that. That's a serious problem. President Kikwete, other people, his age, my age, a bit younger perhaps, will also know that at a certain point in our history on the continent, we had a number of organizations focused on this task of the transformation of our continent. Some of our presenters have put this matter about agency. What's our role? These visions that we have about our continent, how do you bring them about? Earlier, there used to be on the continent a Pan-African youth movement made up of youth organizations. We would meet and discuss and say, what do we do about this continent of ours? Young people. Where is it now? It's disappeared. There was an African Students' Union. And the students' unions of various countries all across the continent would meet and ask this question and answer it. What do we about our continent, including its education and all of that? That disappeared. There was an organization called the All African Trade Union Unity, which brought together all of the African trade unions, organized political organization, formation of the organized workers on the continent, about the future of our continent, disappeared. And there was PAO, Pan-African Women's Organization. PAO still exists. I saw its president not long ago. She participated in the inauguration of the president of Namibia, was here earlier today. We didn't have time to discuss PAO. It exists, but you don't feel its weight. The voice of the African women, that's the body which brought together all of these African women's organizations, would say, as the women of Africa, this is where we want Africa to go. I'm saying it exists, but I don't feel its weight. It's an issue of agency. Our colleagues ask about how do you solve a question about youth employment, youth empowerment, and all of that. I'm saying that the youth need to be party to the answering of that question. But they don't have the organizations on the continent which give them the necessary power as a youth to act together, to say, we as the youth of Africa, this is what we're saying. Whether it's employment or whatever. One of the organs of the African Union is an ECOSOC, which brings the cultural, social, and organizations. And that is the task of it. Well, composition of it is to bring in the ordinary African people into that process, represented by various organizations, economic, cultural, political, whatever. It would serve side by side with the governmental institutions of the African Union. But if I ask any one of you here to say, has it ever come to Tanzania, that ECOSOC? We are an official body of the African Union. We are not government, we are not ministers. But we are trade unionists, we are youth organizers, we are women organizers, and so on. But we are an official structure. Yeah. I'm sure it's never come here. I don't know if other African countries ever come to. Because essentially it exists on paper. What's the problem? I'm going to tell you one or two secrets. But since we're all here agreed on secrecy rules, please don't tell anybody else. There were presidential elections in Cote d'Ivoire 4 years ago. The the opposition parties got together and they contacted me to say, as you know, there are presidential elections in Cote d'Ivoire later in the year, but there are certain things that are not right. And so we'd like that the presidential election should be postponed so that we, the Ivorians, can sort out the things that are not right. And one of the things that they said was not right was the constitution, the composition of the electoral commission. The matter had been taken up to the African people, the Court on Human and People's Rights, which had looked at the question about the composition of the Electoral Commission of Cote d'Ivoire and took a decision that that commission needed to be reconstituted because it was not in a fit state to conduct any election. That's a judgment of the African Court, and said this is what it must be changed and these things must be addressed and therefore it must be reconstituted. The government of Cote d'Ivoire ignored that decision. So the opposition, when they write to me, they say, part of what we want time for is for us as Ivorians to discuss a matter like that, to get the commission properly constituted to run the next elections and other matters. Can you please talk to the African Union, to ECOWAS, and United Nations to help us to address this particular matter? Yeah. So, which I did. So I communicated this message to all of these bodies. To cut that very long story short, nothing happened. I then write to the AU Commission. And I say to the AU Commission, please don't observe those elections. Because held under the conditions that the opposition was talking about, it was obvious that you could never say that those elections would be free and fair. And therefore I say to the AU Commission, don't observe them, because if you do, you legalize them. So, of course they ignored me. They observed the elections. But what was interesting is that the commission then responded in writing to say to me, but President, you of all people know very well that the things that you are asking us to do and not to do, we can't act on because the rules and regulations and policies and whatever of the AU don't allow us, the commission, that kind of space. So in a sense, you are saying, but we're surprised that you of all people should raise these matters with us. I'm about to finish that story. So I responded to the commission. I was very glad that they had written in response to say, thanks for your letter, but you are wrong for the following reasons. So I wrote back to them. And my response was 10 pages. I can see it rumbling here. The letter was too long. People, that's what they think. It was 10 pages. And the reason it was 10 pages is because I was answering the commission. I was answering their letter, pointing them to specific decisions of the African Union, which empower them to do the things that I was saying they must do. And they didn't know. They were not aware of these policy positions. For instance, the Charter on Democracy, President Kikwete would know this. Charter on Democracy, Elections, Governance, and so on, it specifically says, where the Commission deems that the conditions for the holding of elections have not been proper, the Commission must not observe those elections. It's in the Charter. But the Commission didn't know that. That's why they went and observed those elections. The point I'm trying to make, so that's a secret between us. Then at a certain point, President Kikwete and the others, by this time I'm retired, so I'm not guilty. They take a good decision to restructure the African Union so that it becomes an effective instrument in terms of achieving all of these policy positions on which the Union has agreed. So the restructuring process takes place. And part of what is done, what drives the restructuring process is, let's reduce the size of the Commission. Commission is 10 people, AU Commission, including the chair. Let's trim it a bit, make it more efficient, cost-effective, and all of that. And part of what that reform did was to merge two commissions. The Commission on Political Affairs and the Commission on Peace and Security. The current situation now is that you have a Commission of the African Union on politics, peace and security, or political affairs, peace and security. It was a very bad decision. It might be cost effective in the sense that now you have only one commissioner instead of two. But the problem with it is that you are then killing what needs to be your lead commission, the Commission on Political Affairs. Simply because of the volume of work with regard to peace and security. The matter that were raised in our agenda here about peace and security, Pan-Africanism and all that, you know, it's a top-heavy matter on our continent. Conflict in the Sahel, conflict in Sudan, in the two Sudans, in the Horn of Africa, and in Great Lakes, and so on. Naturally, the commissioner responsible for peace and security must attend to all of these things. You add the burden of the politics, they will say, no, I'll come to that tomorrow. And yet, the Commission on Political Affairs is the lead commission in terms of attending to the strategic challenges on the continent. If you say, which AU says, the issue of African unity is important. Dr. Ndlozi was saying we must act together. The enemies come for any one of us, member states of the African community, from outside. He was saying we must get together and unite and say we stand together as Africans. Who is the leader to produce that outcome? It's the Political Affairs Commission. It's not peace and security or commerce or whatever else. It's that commission which leads in terms of the building of this new South Africa, the new Africa defined in terms of, it's a Political Affairs Commission. But in the restructuring, it got killed. Because in the new Commission on Political Affairs, Peace and Security, it gets overwhelmed by peace and security. Now what I'm trying to do is I'm pointing to these two examples, colleagues, is to say, in terms of looking at this renaissance and what to do about it, if you look at the institutions of the African Union, the institutions of the African Union, this continental organization which has given us a whole range of policy positions in terms of what is to be done. Who does it? This agency question has been raised. I'm saying we have an AU commission, which certainly for many years has not been doing what it should do. As a consequence of which, heads of state and government, they meet and they take very major policy positions. What happens after that? Nothing. Even in terms of a simple process of reporting. When I was President of the Republic of South Africa, as confessed, South Africans here might correct me, I don't remember a single instance when President Mbeki comes back from an AU summit and reports to the nation what the summit decided. I don't think we ever did it. So me and my delegation, we know what was decided. The country doesn't know. I'm saying that in looking at this question about reigniting the Renaissance, the question of agency becomes important. And the point that has been made is very correct. I think the phrase that was used was, we must take this notion of Pan-Africanism and so on back to the streets. That it got captured by the politicians and the bureaucrats. No, we must take it back to the people. That's correct. But I'm saying, if we say back to the people, what do we do about this history? We had African people's organizations that died. Who's going to resurrect them? I'm saying you've got the institutions of the African Union which have got an obligation to help implement these policies which have been agreed upon. But you have an AU Commission which does not even know what its own duties and rights and obligations are, until you have to write them a 10-page letter just to point to page, look at page 1, look at page 15, look at page 17 and a half. What do we do about all of that? The last institution I should mention are the political parties on our continent. Because I think it's the first responsibility to reignite this renaissance and the political parties. If I look at the South African case, I'm talking about the ANC now, that's my organization. Over the years, the ANC has walked away from the African agenda. I mean, sit there, you can see it, that the engagement of the ANC with the African challenges over the years has weakened and weakened and weakened. People are preoccupied with what to do with South Africa and so on, which is sure you've got to be preoccupied with that. But you can't do it at the expense of the rest of the continent. But that's what's happening. I see Ambassador Amimpungwe here in front of me. I'm finished with that story, President Kikwete. Some years back, I was invited by the youth of CCM, to come here. And they had a retreat in Zanzibar. So they said they wanted me to come and join them in that retreat. So I came and we went. So these young people, they say, now President Mbeki, late Ben Mkapa, may his soul rest in peace, was also there. So they say, now President, you see, that front row, those are veterans of our struggle for the independence of Tanganyika and so on. Sitting in that front row. The rest is the youth. And now, what's happened, President, they say? If you look at us, I'm a lecturer at University of Dar es Salaam. I'm an accountant, that one is a lawyer, this and that and the other. We've got skills which are globally marketable. I'm Tanzanian, but I can get a job as an accountant anyway. You see these old people here, the veterans. You give them a mobile phone. They don't even know how to use it. You can't teach us any of those things. We can teach them. But here is the reason we asked you to come. These veterans here, many of them were teachers. But they were ready to sacrifice their position so that our country should be liberated. It's very principled people. So they don't have the skills I have to operate a cellular phone. I have those skills, but I don't have the value system which they have. And the problem is that we are going to develop from this as a youth to become the national leaders of Tanzania. With all the skills that we have, but without the values. Can you please help us to get these two things to emerge, the skills and the values? One of them, a young lady, says, you know, President, I contested for the position in the Youth League. And I was defeated. But nevertheless, so as an official, secretary, or whatever, nevertheless, I was elected onto the executive. So we discussed the matter of why she got defeated. And she says, it's because my competitor used money. Bought votes. And they've got more votes than I did. So I say that worries me. That the youth of CCM are already using money to buy votes to get elected. And she said, President, the matter does not end there. This young comrade of mine, who had the money and bought the votes, is a drug dealer. He got the money from selling drugs. I'm ending with that story because I'm saying this reigniting of the African Renaissance, the first responsibility lies with our political parties on the continent, inspired by the spirit of Pan-Africanism and the sense of sacrifice which those veterans were sitting, those one were meeting in Zanzibar. By that spirit of self-sacrifice being loyalty to principle and loyalty to this Pan-African perspective. We're talking about Mwalimu Julius Nyerere here. We need more Nyereres today. Our political parties need more Nyereres. The tragedy is that President Kikwete, I'm sure you and I, when we sit in the corner and we go through each one of these political parties on the continent, would come to the same conclusions, that things are not right. In the end, what does that mean? It means that the university, the students, and I don't know, I'm not going about it, the lecturers and professors, the students. The students of the University of Dar es Salaam need to sit together and say, we want to be part of the process of reigniting this renaissance. We want to take our place, respond to our own responsibility to define the future of the continent, and answer the question themselves, well, what do we do as university students of this university? What do we do to achieve that objective? It's a task. I'm giving this as a task. The Chancellor of the university has agreed with me that I can give you that task. This university, it's an old home to me. I've been here many times, and the reason for that is because this particular university was the lead university in helping the continent to answer the question from 1960 when the continent gets independent. This university was very central to answering the question for independent Africa. What do you do with your independence? Now you've got it. You fought for it. Very well done. But what do you do with it? This academic institution here was very, very central to answering the question, what does liberated Africa do with its liberation? I think this university has got that task again, to say, what do we do? What do we do as this university to reignite the renaissance of Africa, to which people like Mwalimu Nyerere devoted their lives? And the CEO of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation has said to me that what I must say to you, the students, that please contact the foundation, his foundation, Thabo Mbeki Foundation, because they are starting the process of the reactivation of the African youth, including the students, to organize themselves on the continent and to focus on this task. So he says, please, he said, I must say that, please contact the foundation so that we can work together. Agency. Who are the people who are going to bring about these changes about which we agreed? It's us. But in order to do that, we must be organized. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming, and thanks for listening.